This episode of the Beef Market Update is brought to you by Brett Young. You treat them like family, feed them like family. Talk to your retailer about Brett Young's forage and corn options for a happy, healthy herd.
I'm Lindsay Smith with RealAgriculture.com and Real Ag Radio, and joining me now for the Beef Market Update, as always, it's Anne Wasko with Gateway Livestock Exchange. Welcome here, Anne.
Thanks, Lindsay. Good to be here.
It is, okay, so it's, well, middle of March. It's almost St. Paddy's Day. Do you have big St. Paddy's Day plans beyond beef stew?
No. Oh, sorry, green beer?
That's it. I'm doing green pancakes. That's my whole plan.
Oh.
Green pancakes,
Okay.
yeah. I don't want to ruin beer with green food dye, so we're going with pancakes.
Okay.
And a good beef stew. Okay, so let's talk markets, though. Where are we at on the cash trade? Let's start maybe down in the south, as we usually do, and work our way north.
Yeah, well, kind of across the board, good news, higher prices to different varying degrees kind of everywhere. So good markets. In the northern states, the Nebraskas, the Midwest, 2 to 3 higher this week, 187 to 188. Still a little light to call trade in the southern Kansas, Texas region, but really feeling like they've got a good chance at 185 to 186, which would be steady to a buck higher. So again, looking like we've had a good week in terms of trade. That cutout, that choice cutout, wholesale price last night closed at just over 310 a hundred. That's up $4 from last week. And again, just like 2 weeks ago when we talked, the smaller fed cattle slaughter certainly is helping to support this cutout going forward into the second quarter, and, you know, typically when we see the cutout make its high. So everything seems to be on track in terms of those trends. Coming north into Western Canada, the fat cattle market also looking higher on the dressed basis. We'll call it 380 to 385 delivered, so that'll be anywhere from steady to $5 higher. And there was a little bit of live FOB, the feedlot trade at 236, and we'll call that $3 higher. So certainly averages are going to be up this week, kind of everywhere you look. And I won't go into all the feeder cattle classes, but that story would hold true as well, whether we're talking about in Alberta or in Ontario. So market's just solid. I did want to just add before I leave the fat cattle market in Canada, steer carcass weights continue to be big. Mm-hmm. We're working through these heavier cattle, but cattle are staying on feed longer. We've got some negative feeding margins and lower costs of gain, so that recipe means feed the cattle longer. And so last week's weight on steers was 972. That's 45 pounds bigger than last year and 53 pounds above the 5-year average. So I do think weights are going to just plumb run heavier than last year, but these are big jumps, and I do think we'll narrow that gap as we get into the calf feds in the second quarter.
Mm-hmm. That is a lot of beef. Got to tell you. Yeah, that's a lot. Okay, we did get some trade data. What do we know on that?
Yeah, starting off the year, so January data, 1 month, doesn't certainly tell the tale for what's going to happen all year, but we'll keep everyone up to date as we go through the year. Beef exports for Canada in January were up 2%. The value of those exports still up 11%, so still showing that relationship between, with our wholesale prices up, that means the value of our trade is higher, for example, than our volume. On the import side of beef, we've got 2 months in. It's a different series, so January and February beef imports into Canada are up 8%. And I think that's a trend, and I'll talk about the U.S. numbers in a second, but that's a trend that we expect both Canada and the U.S. to see as we go through 24 with these, record high prices and strong, especially on the trim market or the manufacturing beef price at record levels or near record levels in most spots. We're going to certainly see imports into North America, I think, running well above what we've seen in recent years. So that's something to keep an eye out for. I don't think that's going to be a surprise, but it will be the trend. And again, and the large reason for larger prices, smaller slaughter, smaller production, all of those pieces are going to just simply draw more beef into North America. I did want to talk about live cattle trade as well. We've talked a lot about feeder cattle imports over the last number of years. And in January, we had imports at 17,000 head. So that was down from last year. But you can see when I talk about exports, we only exported 4,000 feeders in January. So, again, pretty small numbers there. Fed cattle exports were up 8% in January as we continue to try to get some of these bigger cattle cleaned up and moved out. Cow exports down 7%. Again, Lindsay, back to the strong market. Our slaughter cow market in Canada is super strong. We're going to be averaging near 150 live this week through markets in Alberta. So that's the strongest price we've ever seen for this time of year. And again, our cow kill in Canada is down 9%. So lots of reasons for keeping the cows in Canada for harvest, and those prices are super strong.
All right, and what about on the U.S.? How does that sort of mirror or contrast what's happening here?
Yeah, no, I'd say mirror. So certainly U.S. beef exports in January were down 4%. That's not a surprise to me. I think as we continue to move through the year and see smaller production levels, the U.S. production levels down between 4% and 5% right now, and that trend will continue. So you're going to see smaller exports with smaller production. And on the flip side, imports. Now, they had a big jump in January. They were up 38% for beef imports coming into the U.S. Australia, New Zealand, and Brazil certainly leading the pace in terms of that. And the Brazilian piece in terms of how the tariff rates work into the U.S., certainly moving beef earlier in the season, which is typical. Especially into a high-price market. So that should slow down as we go through the year, but that's a series we're going to watch closely.
Now, okay, so I was actually going to ask that if that same trade data tells us where these cattle come from, is that similar on the Canadian side? Are we sourcing cattle similar to where the U.S. gets there from?
So beef. We're talking beef here,
we're talking beef.
right?
Okay, yeah, so same idea, but beef.
But yes,
yeah.
So same idea. So on the beef side, our largest jumps came from Australia and Uruguay. So again, those markets, we certainly have the breakdown by country. And for Canada, our biggest importers in there, Australia was double what they brought in January last year, January and February. So yeah, that's similar trends in terms of where it's coming from.
Mm-hmm. Okay, interesting. Always, it's fascinating, I think, sometimes to think about just, I always just sort of envision in my head with Canada anyway, that we just export so much beef. I don't always think about, and I think about cattle coming from the U.S., but I don't always think about the fact that we'd be bringing in beef from all sorts of other places, right? So
yes, certainly do. It's two-way trade.
That's right.
Very important two-way trade. Yeah,
absolutely. Okay, just quickly, we've got a bit more time, and just wanted to touch on, of course, some optimism. We've talked about this a few times on, what we need to see, for the Canadian cow-calf operator, maybe the feeder side to really think about holding back heifers and starting to rebuild maybe, or at least maintaining where we're at. I was at the Ottawa Valley Farm Show this week. Definitely anyone I ran into who has cattle was maybe half smiling. Numbers have been strong. Feed prices maybe coming down. Are we hearing a bit of optimism going forward?
Oh, I think that's certainly the case, Lindsay. Same thing anywhere I've been recently in terms of talking about cattle prices, especially for the grassroots operators, this cycle doesn't happen very often, every 10 or 12 years. So this is a wonderful movement in prices. And again, like you say, with input prices also lower than where we've been, it's kind of costs are down a bit and prices are up. So that's a great recipe.
Mm-hmm. All right. And we'll keep at hopefully rolling this optimism on and see where it ends up in a year or two from now. Okay, Anne, thanks so much for joining me here on the Beef Market Update.
Super, thanks for having me.
Thank you for downloading this episode of the Beef Market Update, brought to you by Brett Young. Check out their silage and grazing corn, stock blends, or custom build your own mix for a happy, healthy herd. Talk to your retailer today.